Hello and welcome to the Discover History YouTube channel, and we've now come to a conclusion for our look at the Battle of Worcester. Now we are actually stood in the grounds of the King's School in Worcester, and this is a place that you won't get access to any normal time because it's actually part of the King's School. So we're actually in the garden, and the garden is a very unique place because this is actually marking where the fording point once crossed the river way back in prehistoric times. So we're actually on a mound that also includes the bit on my left, which is where Worcester Cathedral is, and you can probably just see behind me here the River Severn, and this was the crossing for many years before we actually had a bridge in the Roman or late Roman period. So people used to cross here at low tide, and that's important because you have to remember Worcester had a tidal river. The River Severn was tidal up to here until the locks and the weirs were put in the 1800s basically. But the important thing about this site is there was once a Motte and Bailey castle, and we're actually stood under what would have been a huge mound of earth. So at the top above us now would have been a turret, and the Bailey spread out in that direction towards Sidbury, so a Motte and Bailey, and it was a Norman castle that was built here to command not only Worcester but also command the bridging point or the fording point and the bend, and that's the important thing, the bend in the River Severn that we have going on behind us here. Now during the Battle of Worcester, even the days before, the mound was terraced. In other words, people went up there, levelled it off, staked it, and we know several leather cannons were placed at the top supporting the fighting around the south side of the city. Now by around about 8 or 9 o'clock in Worcester, Charles had long gone and the fighting was dying out in most of the streets. However, there would have been small pockets of resistance appearing all over the place. Now we do know that Castle Mound started firing their guns earlier in the day and were very short on powder. They would have watched Fort Royal being taken in that direction over there. They would have seen the Scots fleeing on the river meadows behind here. But we know that throughout the whole day this mound was held by the Royalists. The Scots up here were very, very much encased in here and were not going to let the castle mound get taken. However, by around about 9 o'clock, 10 o'clock, this entire mound was surrounded. There was artillery firing into it, and unfortunately the casualties up here and the lack of powder meant that most of the Scots actually came off the mound. Dangerous thing and ridiculous thing to do really when they had the upper hand on the high ground, and they came off the mound. And we know from the descriptions that they came off the mound and went down to the river bank behind. Now there was never a large wall here. This would have been a wall of about this height with a small drop the other side, literally onto the mud bank at low tide or into the water at high tide. And we know the Scots did their last stand in this sort of area on that riverbank. And what they would have done is laid down their arms, their muskets, their swords, and bear in mind they're out of powder at this point anyway, and they put their hands up. Now, if you have a look on our little map here, that we've used several times before, as I said, the fighting was taking place out here originally, the fort was taken, and then the whole of the streets of Worcester here was being fought over. And then Castle Mound sits here. So as I said, they held out to the last man, and around about 10 o'clock at night, the men had come off that mound and they were literally on the banks of the river here, and they were laying down their arms and surrendering. So you can say the battle started really with the advance on Worcester from about 6 AM. You've seen the different phases. If you go on our playlist, you will follow them again and again. And now at 10 o'clock, the last stand is taking place down here. Charles had fled the city hours ago, but these men up here in the darkness were fighting to the last man. They've now surrendered, and the city is now under Parliament control. We know fighting was sporadic in the city overnight. We hear of Lord Melville, who was shot down Friar Street just to spoil his jacket. He was already unconscious and they were stripping the dead at that point, or stripping the wounded. Many of the wounded was being shot that even Worcester people we know were being dragged out of their houses for harbouring the Scots. It would have been absolutely horrific. We know Cromwell, as I mentioned before, refused to come into the city, and the descriptions state how the city streets were full of dead Scots. They say in the river meadows across there was dead Scots all the way up to the city bridge and also into the city. Some of the streets were actually piled high with dead horses. We know if you look at the casualty figures, something doesn't ring true, because Cromwell actually stated approximately only 100 to 200 of his men were killed in the fighting. Is this true, or is this just glorifying his victory? And it was said about 2,000 to 4,000 royalist soldiers lay slain in and around Worcester. It was a big battle, 30,000 men against 12,000 men. Technically, the Battle of Worcester was over and the end of the Civil War was finally concluded. This is Castle Mound. When they have an open day, and they will be having open days in the future once COVID-19 is gone, do come to this site and do find the plaque slap bang in the centre of the school ground stating this is where Castle Mound stood. Sadly, this is where the Civil War was lost. At 10 o'clock at night, Charles was on the run and the army was being annihilated. This army that he had brought all the way down from Scotland, 300 miles in 3 weeks. Anyway, on that note, hopefully you've enjoyed following the Battle of Worcester that was fought on the 3rd of September 1651. And what we would like you to do is continue subscribing, continue to like and share our posts on Facebook, Twitter and Instagram. And remember, we do talks on the Battle of Worcester, we do battlefield tours on the Battle of Worcester, we even do city tours on the Civil War in Worcester. And the most important thing you have to remember is go on our website, look at what we have on offer at www.discover-history.co.uk. And remember, like, share, and also make sure you comment. What would you like to see us do videos on next? We've already got a bit of a things to do list, but let us know. On that note, thanks for following the Battle of Worcester on the 3rd of September 1651, and we'll see you soon. Bye bye.